Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, one concern that I have, I think that the Congress has, is the extraordinary growth in the size of the bureaucracy in the Department of Defense. And so, and now we're having a debate about reducing the number of 4-stars, but it seems that the genesis or the origin and the growth is the rise of these combatant commands. And it seems that they certainly, some of them have a good focus, but it seems like in some of them they become incredibly parochial as to their region. They're redundant functions with the State Department. So how would you state that we ought to look at the effectiveness of combatant commands and to what extent we ought to have them going forward?
Well, let me try to deal with that. The combatant commands may have generated some additional civilian slots, and because the military end strength is what it is. But I don't think that's the major driver in the growth of civilian numbers. And I think what's needed is a far more careful look, clearly with congressional legislation, otherwise it'll never happen, at why we need as many as we have added in the last 15 years. I mean, it's arguable that as we've added the 7,000 civilians, we haven't gotten particularly more efficient. If we had, you might not be having this hearing today. So there's something fundamentally wrong, and it goes well beyond the combatant commands. As to the combatant commands themselves, I agree with you, there needs to be some change. I think there should be a 4-star cyber commander, for example. Whether you need a NORTHCOM and a SOUTHCOM separately is something that needs to be looked at. Whether you need a CENTCOM and an AFRICOM, given that the locus of Islamic terror is somewhere between the two of them, maybe you want to rethink that. I think there needs to be a closer look. Again, going back to John Hamre's point, what are we trying to do in the world? And then, okay, what kind of commands do we need in order to do that? Unfortunately, that's not how the UCP works, the Unified Command Plan, and those aren't the questions we've been asking.
I won't surprise you, Mr. Coffman, that I feel pretty strongly about the value of geographic combatant commands. Again, as I stated earlier, I think there is great value in having a commander and a group of people who wake up every day focused on a specific region. I would agree, though, that they don't need to be as large as they are. I failed in that in my time at Africa Command. I should have been more aggressive in reducing the size of the command, and I regret that. So I think there's a time to do that. But I wouldn't give up the goodness of the relationships that are developed between that combatant command and the military leaders in the area of responsibility. That's a very valuable component, I think, in our building partner capacity and reliance upon others. To the point that the threats that we face today are no longer exclusively regional or trans-regional. Some of them certainly are global threats. So mechanisms that allow greater agility in the application of force and capabilities across combatant command boundaries, I think those would be helpful. I always felt that I had a great relationship with European Command, Central Command, Pacific Command as we did things together, but it was always, frankly, was more based on personality than it was on structure. And so we need some structure that makes cross-combatant command boundaries more effective and more efficient.
So in when we look at Goldwater-Nichols, it seemed that the momentum for it was looking at military setbacks that had occurred with the failure during the Carter administration of the rescue in Iran, and with the ultimate failure of the Marine Corps presence in Lebanon under the Reagan administration. I was involved in the early phases of the unfortunate failure in Beirut that led to the loss of, I think, 241 U.S. military personnel. So when we look at the response in Benghazi and we look at our structure, what have we learned? Because I was in a Marine Amphibious unit positioned off Lebanon to evacuate the U.S. Embassy on order. And we were there, we were positioned there when things were getting hot in Lebanon. What have we learned in terms of our inability or inertia in terms of responding to Benghazi from the standpoint of looking at our overall structure?
I obviously have some familiarity with this subject and have appeared before this committee on the subject. I think we've learned a lot. I think first and foremost, obviously, the security of U.S. diplomatic facilities is primarily the purview of the Department of State and host nation. There are some things that can be strengthened there. In terms of military response, I think some of the things that the Department of Defense has done over the past few years to decrease response time by establishing a commanders and extremists force dedicated to Africa, which didn't exist before, to establish the Marine Corps Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force in Spain that is postured to respond more quickly. I think those are all very, very positive steps that have occurred from a tragic incident.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.